The first thing I heard was her laugh, sharp, disrespectful, and echoing through the thin wall like she owned the place. "She's too old to run anything now. You know that, right?" She said it with such certainty that it sliced through me before I even processed the words. "Before you begin, take a deep breath, because this story starts with a secret camera, a 7 p.m. phone call, and a betrayal no mother should ever face. Stay with me, every second matters." For a moment I didn't move. I just stood there in the dim hallway outside my son's office, my hand still resting against the cool metal of the staircase railing. I had been watching everything from my phone in the car only moments before, but hearing it in person, hearing it live, was different. It was heavier, more real. But instead of reacting like a wounded mother, I exhaled slowly and allowed my heartbeat to settle into something steady and frighteningly calm. I've learned over the years that when people expect you to break, staying calm confuses them more than shouting ever could. And I intended to confuse them. The hidden camera I had installed earlier that week was still recording, a detail neither of them knew about. That was my quiet advantage, tucked safely behind a picture frame he had never bothered to notice. I didn't intend to use it tonight, but life doesn't usually wait for the right moment. It shows you what you need to see exactly when you're strong enough to handle the truth. I glanced at the time on my phone. 7:42 p.m. The office building was nearly empty, the usual hum of people replaced by the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant clatter of the night janitor's cart. Outside, the parking lot shimmered under the streetlights, and through the large glass windows, I could still see my car in the far corner, slightly crooked from how quickly I'd parked after speeding over. I hadn't planned on coming inside. Watching from the car had been enough. But something about that woman's voice, that confidence, pushed me up those stairs and down this long hallway. Her laugh came again, softer this time but thick with arrogance. "Once she's out, things will finally run smoothly." My son didn't say anything at first. That silence was worse than any insult either of them could have thrown at me. I leaned just slightly toward the door, careful to keep my shadow off the frosted glass. Then I heard him. "Yeah, I know. It's time." The words slammed into me harder than I expected. I steadied myself with a hand on the wall. The paint felt cold under my palm, grounding me. You would think after all these years, after raising him, after protecting him, after giving him a place in the business, I would have recognized the moment his loyalty changed. But betrayal doesn't always happen loudly. Sometimes, it sneaks up in whispers and small hesitations you ignore until they become impossible to overlook. A small breeze brushed across my neck. The hallway window near the elevator had been left slightly open, letting in the crisp night air. I welcomed it. Kept me alert, kept me from slipping into sadness too quickly. Sadness could come later, after I understood everything. Right now I needed clarity. Inside the office I could hear something tapping. Maybe a pen, maybe my son's nervous habit he'd had since childhood. I imagined him sitting behind my desk, the same desk I had bought secondhand 30 years ago when the business was just a corner office with mismatched chairs. He used to sit under it while I worked, drawing pictures of buildings he said he'd own one day. How strange that memories become painful once the person in them changes. I took a small step closer to the door. The hallway carpet muffled my movement, but I still paused when I heard my son's chair creak. For a moment I thought he sensed me. But the woman spoke again, her voice low and sticky, like honey laced with something poisonous. "Stop worrying. He trusts you. She won't see it coming." That made him chuckle. A soft, guilty laugh I had never heard from him before. I felt something twist inside my chest. Not sharp like anger but dull and bruising like disappointment settling deep in a place I didn't know existed. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet hallway. I checked my phone again even though the time hadn't changed much. 7:44. 2 minutes. 2 minutes of words that aged me 10 years. Footsteps approached from behind. I straightened quickly, wiping the shock from my face. It was just the janitor, a kind man who'd worked in the building longer than I had. He pushed his cart slowly, his radio playing old country music softly from his pocket. He gave me a glance, recognizing me even in the dim hallway. "Everything all right, ma'am?" I nodded. "Yes. Just checking on something." He gave the office door a curious look. He must have heard the raised voices earlier. But he didn't ask more. He simply continued down the hall, leaving behind the faint smell of lemon cleaner. I waited until his cart wheels faded around the corner before leaning my ear closer to the door again. The woman was speaking rapidly now, papers rustling in the background. "We'll finalize everything by next week. After that she won't have any say. You'll take full control." My son murmured something I couldn't hear. Then she added almost mockingly, "It's time she steps aside. She's had her chance." My throat tightened, but I kept breathing evenly. I reminded myself that reacting too soon would only satisfy them. I wasn't here to confront, not yet. I was here to learn. And learn I did. I listened as they discussed things I didn't even know they'd been handling together. Meetings I hadn't been told about. Clients I thought I still had direct contact with. I picked up new details with each passing minute, small clues that painted a larger picture. The longer I stood there, the clearer it became that this wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was slow, carefully woven, and mostly hidden in plain sight. So I didn't turn away. I didn't crumble. There's a strange strength that comes from realizing you're on your own. A cold, stabilizing focus. I felt it spreading through me now. I adjusted my coat around my shoulders, the light fabric brushing against my wrists. My purse pressed against my hip, and inside it the small backup phone, the one only I knew about, buzzed softly, a reminder of the secret advantage I hadn't yet used. I ignored it. Everything else could wait. A chair scraped inside the office. Then the woman said something that pushed me past the line between pain and clarity. "She's not strong enough to fight back." She said it with so much certainty it almost sounded like a statement of fact. But she was wrong. She just didn't know it yet. I placed my hand gently on the doorknob. The cool metal tingled against my skin. I could hear my son standing now, maybe pacing. She was still talking, her voice dripping with confidence. I turned the knob just a fraction, enough to hear the click but not enough to push it open. My mind replayed every moment of the last few minutes. The laughter, the insults, the plans whispered behind my back, and something shifted inside me. A final line was drawn. I exhaled one slow, deliberate breath, and pushed the door open. The room fell silent. My son's head snapped up. The woman froze mid-sentence. And for the first time that night, their expressions showed something I hadn't heard in their voices at all. Fear. My son's eyes widened, and the woman's smirk dropped so fast it almost made a sound. For a split second no one breathed. The air felt thick, almost humid, heavy with the shock of being caught. I closed the door behind me gently. No slamming, no fury, just controlled calm. That calm unsettled them more than any shouting could have. He was the first to recover. She straightened her blouse, lifted her chin, and crossed her arms as if she had every right to stand in my office. The confidence she tried to collect around herself was almost theatrical. I watched her attempt to regain control, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear like my presence was nothing more than a brief interruption. But the tremor in her hand betrayed her. I didn't speak. Silence has its own power, one I learned long before my son was even born. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her shift her weight from one foot to the other, her shoes clicking slightly against the hardwood floor. Finally she forced a thin smile. "Oh, we didn't expect you tonight." Her voice carried this polished tone, smooth on the surface but with a cold metal edge underneath. She sounded like someone used to controlling rooms, not someone used to being questioned. "I can see that," I replied softly. My son swallowed hard. His hands were shoved into his pockets and he stared at the floor like he was 13 again, caught sneaking out past curfew. "Mom, we were just working." I finished for him, keeping my voice steady. His eyes darted up, searching my face for clues. Was I angry, hurt, or simply passing through? He couldn't tell. That uncertainty made him shift uncomfortably. The woman stepped closer, inserting herself into the conversation. "We were actually discussing some improvements for the business. Things that need fresh thinking. A new direction." She said it with this casual authority, as if she had already taken ownership. As if my presence was an inconvenience in a place she believed belonged to her. I studied her quietly. She was younger than me by at least 20 years. Polished. Sharp jawline. Expensive perfume. Too strong for a small office but perfect for someone who wanted to leave her scent everywhere she stood. Her nails were painted a deep red, well maintained, like someone who had time to sit in salons rather than run a business hands-on. She was the kind of woman who planned her image more carefully than her intentions. But what caught my attention most wasn't her confidence. It was the way she stood slightly in front of my son. Like she was guarding him. Or worse, claiming him. So, she continued with a shrug, tonight isn't really the best time. We're in the middle of something important. She expected me to back out. To leave with an apology. To play the role of the fragile, aging woman she believed I was. Instead, I walked farther into the room. My son instinctively stepped aside, almost bumping into the filing cabinet. The woman's eyes followed me with a mixture of annoyance and uncertainty. I touched the edge of the desk, my desk, where the wood had softened over the years from my hands resting on it. The lamp cast a warm pool of light across the surface, and there, next to a stack of new files, sat a coffee mug that didn't belong to me. It belonged to her. A soft, floral design, nothing like the plain mugs I preferred. And it sat on the left side of the desk, my side, like she'd been sitting in my chair earlier. I ran my fingers across the mug's rim before looking at her. Long night? I asked. She hesitated, surprised by the question. Yes. We've been working late all week. There's a lot to handle. I nodded, even though I already knew she was lying. I could see it in the way she avoided my eyes, in the way her shoulders stiffened. She wasn't working late for the business. She was working late to position herself deeper into a place she didn't earn. My son finally found his voice. Mom, maybe we should talk outside. His tone was strained, uneven. The panic in his eyes was impossible to hide. No, she said firmly before I could respond. She can stay. We have nothing to hide. Her boldness took even him by surprise. He glanced at her sharply, but she didn't look at him. She kept her gaze fixed on me, almost daring me to challenge her. I tilted my head. Is that so? She smiled again, more tightly this time. Of course. Transparency is important in leadership. Audacity. She was lecturing me in my own office about leadership. I took a slow breath and leaned my weight slightly on the desk, grounding myself. My knee ached a little from standing too long, a small reminder of age I didn't bother hiding. But age has its own advantages. It has memory, perspective, experience. All the things she lacked. You've made yourself comfortable, I said quietly. Her smile twitched. I'm efficient wherever I work. Efficient. A convenient word people use when they slide into places they don't belong. And how long have you been assisting my son? I asked. A few months, she answered quickly. Too quickly. My son jumped in. She's been helping streamline operations. Nothing unusual. Nothing unusual. Yet her personal mug was here. Her files were mixed with mine. Her perfume lingered in the air. And she stood protectively between me and my own son. I walked to the corner of the room where a filing box had been left open. Inside were several folders, each marked with client names I recognized, some of which I hadn't been updated on recently. A knot formed in my stomach as I picked up one of the folders. Why is this here? I asked softly, flipping through the pages. These were contracts I should have signed. Calls I should have been on. Decisions I should have been part of. She stepped forward. I reorganized the workflow. It's faster if things come through one channel instead of multiple hands. Her tone was smooth, but I heard the insult she didn't say out loud. I placed the folder back into the box with steady hands. And that channel is you? She didn't answer immediately. Her silence spoke louder than words. I realized in that moment that she hadn't just inserted herself into my son's professional life. She had wrapped her influence around him so tightly that he couldn't distinguish her ambition from his own judgment anymore. My son rubbed his forehead. Mom, please. Let's just handle this tomorrow. But tomorrow didn't matter. What mattered was right now, this moment where truth and illusion stood face to face. I stepped closer to the woman until only a few feet separated us. She held her ground, but her breathing shifted, the slightest hitch almost unnoticeable, but not to me. You believe you can run this place better than I can? I asked. Her lips parted. A flicker of triumph lit her expression. I believe the company needs leadership that understands modern direction. There was the belief that age equals weakness, that history equals irrelevance, that building something means less than inheriting it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just looked at her long enough for her confidence to waver. Then I said, I hope your plans work out. Both she and my son froze. I offered no explanation, no hint of emotion. Just those 7 words, gentle, polite, but delivered with a calm so deliberate it sent a ripple of uncertainty through the room. Her forehead creased. What does that mean? I lifted my purse strap over my shoulder. Exactly what it sounds like. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. I walked toward the door slowly, feeling both of their eyes burn into my back. The office felt smaller now, like it was contracting around them instead of me. My hand rested on the doorknob once more, warm from the overhead light. I paused, not turning around, just listening to the small shifts behind me. The rustle of papers, my son's uneven breath, the woman's subtle tap of her heel on the floor. They didn't know what I knew. They didn't know what I had seen. They didn't know what I had already collected. But they felt it. A tension. A shift. A warning. I opened the door halfway, letting the cool hallway air sweep in. "Good night," I said softly. And without another word I stepped out, leaving behind not anger, but uncertainty. The kind that keeps people awake long after the lights go out. The cool hallway air followed me as I stepped out of the office, and I didn't look back. Not even when I heard my son whisper something to her in a shaky voice. The elevator was waiting at the end of the hall, its doors half open like it had been expecting me. I walked inside slowly, pressed the ground floor button and let the doors shut. Only then, in that small metal box humming quietly around me, did the weight of everything settle across my shoulders. But I didn't cry. No tears came. Just a slow, steady sigh that left a tightness behind my ribs. The ride down felt longer than it had any right to. Every floor I passed illuminated a small glow inside the elevator, and each glow sharpened something in me. Not anger. No, anger comes fast and burns out quickly. This was something colder, steadier. A kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. When the doors opened, the lobby was empty except for the security guard behind the desk. He lifted a hand in greeting, and I gave him a polite nod as I walked toward the glass doors. My shoes clicked softly against the floor, echoing in the quiet space. The building always seemed bigger at night, the shadows stretching longer, the air stiller. Outside, the wind had picked up. Maple leaves skittered across the pavement like they were trying to tell me something. I pulled my coat tighter around me and crossed the parking lot to my car. The cold made my hands stiff, and I fumbled with the keys for a moment before unlocking the door. Once inside, I sat for a few seconds with my hands resting on the steering wheel. The calm I had maintained upstairs lingered, but underneath it, something else churned. A deep ache that came from a place more tender than pride. My own son. My child. Plotting behind my back with a woman who spoke like she already owned everything I'd built. I let out a long breath and finally turned on the engine. The headlights flooded the empty lot, casting long shadows behind the nearby shrubs and illuminating the side of the building I'd spent half my life walking in and out of. The office lights on the second floor were still on. His light, her light. I stared at them for a moment, then drove away. When I reached home, my house felt colder than usual. It wasn't the temperature, it was the quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after disappointment. I hung my coat on the hook near the door and set my purse on the table. The small backup phone inside buzzed again, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to read anything yet. Instead, I walked to the kitchen. The overhead light flickered before turning on fully, humming softly. I filled the sink with warm water, rinsing the mug I'd left there earlier. Doing something simple with my hands steadied me. Each movement, soak, rinse, dry, quieted my thoughts just enough for me to breathe normally again. But the ache stayed. After finishing the small chores, I finally sat at the kitchen table. My legs felt heavy, and the wood beneath my palms was familiar and grounding. I had bought this table when my son was still in high school. He used to sit across from me, legs bouncing, asking endless questions about the business. How did you get your first client? How do you know who to trust? How can I help someday? I swallowed hard. People change. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes so quietly you miss it until it becomes impossible to ignore. The backup phone buzzed again. I finally reached into my purse and pulled it out. A notification blinked on the screen. An automated alert from the hidden camera app. A new recording had been stored. I hesitated only briefly before opening it. The video wasn't long. Just a few minutes. But it showed something important. Something I hadn't heard while standing outside the door. The woman wasn't simply advising him. She was pushing him. Once she's out, we'll move fast, she said to him. You'll handle the clients and I'll handle the internal structure. It'll be smooth. Much smoother than it is now. He didn't disagree. He didn't defend me. He didn't even pause. I watched their faces closely. Their expressions. Their tone. The way she leaned closer, lowering her voice to say something I couldn't quite decipher. And the way he nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. He wasn't trapped. He wasn't manipulated. He was willingly participating. I closed the video and set the phone down gently. Then I turned off the kitchen light and walked to my bedroom. The next morning I woke before the sun. The sky outside my window was just beginning to lighten, soft gray and lavender spreading across it like watercolor. I sat on the edge of my bed for a moment, listening to the subtle ticking of the alarm clock. My body felt stiff, as if the shock of the night before had settled into my joints. I reached for my robe and tied it tightly around my waist. The floorboards creaked softly as I made my way to the living room. I didn't turn on any lights at first. I let the faint morning glow guide me. My old work bag sat near the bookshelf and I knelt slowly to open it. Inside were several folders I had taken home earlier in the week. Folders I had barely looked through until now. I spread them across the coffee table, flipping through contract notes, client feedback, and financial statements. And that was when I noticed it. Small changes. Tiny inconsistencies. Dates that didn't align perfectly. Signatures I didn't remember approving. Nothing big enough to raise alarms individually, but together they formed a pattern. A subtle one, but unmistakable. Someone had been adjusting things without my knowledge. Not destroying anything, just shifting, redirecting, rearranging. Enough to create a divide. Enough to weaken my position. Enough to make me appear uninvolved or out of touch. And all of it pointed to one possibility. This wasn't sudden. I leaned back into the sofa cushion, letting that truth settle. It didn't hurt the same way last night's words had. This was a different kind of pain. One mixed with clarity. A realization that what I thought had been careless miscommunication was, in fact, intentional. I picked up a pen and began making notes. Dates. Names. Changes I didn't authorize. Calls I didn't attend because I hadn't been informed. One by one, small truths came to light. Pieces of a larger puzzle. By late morning, the sun filled the living room, warming my hands as I wrote. I paused only when my stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten. I made myself a piece of toast, drank a glass of water, and returned to the table. The more I reviewed, the more details emerged. Things I had once brushed aside, thinking they were small oversights. A cancelled meeting I hadn't been told about. A client follow-up handled without me. A report updated with unfamiliar phrasing. By early afternoon I had a small stack of notes, each one a quiet thread of truth. None of them were enough on their own. But together they painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. Around 3 o'clock I decided to drive to the office. I didn't go inside. I parked across the street instead, rolling my window down slightly. The cool air carried the faint smell of pine from the landscaping, mixed with the exhaust from passing cars. I watched the second-floor windows. One light was on. His light. I felt an unusual calm wash over me, not the calm of acceptance but of preparation. A few minutes later, the janitor stepped out of the building carrying a bag of trash. When he saw me, he crossed the street cautiously, glancing over his shoulder as if checking whether anyone had followed him. He leaned down slightly. "Ma'am, I don't want to intrude, but you left in a hurry last night." "I did," I said gently. He hesitated, lowering his voice. "I heard some things. Through the vents. Maybe you already know, but they've been staying late a lot. Every night this week." I felt my breath catch just for a moment. Not from surprise. More from confirmation. "Thank you," I said. He nodded, relieved I wasn't upset with him, and returned to the building. I sat there another 10 minutes, watching the windows, feeling the threads of small truths gathering inside me. Then I drove home again. That night I began calling board members. Not to accuse. Not to warn. Just to talk. Simple conversations. Polite. Warm. But purposeful. I asked about their families. Their upcoming holidays. Their thoughts on recent changes. And they spoke freely. They told me about meetings I didn't know happened. Discussions I hadn't been invited to. Documents they assumed I approved. Each call added another piece to the puzzle. Not the full picture, just enough for me to see the outline forming. By the time I hung up the last call, the living room was dark except for the lamp on the side table. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not sadness. Not even betrayal. Something quieter, sharper, more controlled. The beginning of a plan. Not fully formed. Not ready to act. But alive. And in that silent room I realized something important. They believed their advantage was my age. My softness. My trust. But they didn't know the truth about me. I never rush. I never react. I never strike first. I wait. I observe. I understand. And in those silent days I did all three. The shape of what was coming began in that quiet. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady. Patient. Certain. And when the silence of those days finally settled into certainty, the shape of what I needed to do became clear enough that I felt it in my bones. The morning of the annual meeting arrived colder than usual. A thin layer of frost covered my front steps, and I had to hold the railing carefully as I walked down to the car. The air tasted sharp, like metal, and each breath fogged the windshield as I sat behind the wheel. My hands trembled just a little, not from fear but from the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't a plan I rushed into. It grew over days, piece by piece, each discovery adding another thread until I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. By the time the meeting day came, I wasn't running on emotion. I was running on truth. I arrived at the building early, earlier than I had in years. The sun had barely risen, but the parking lot already buzzed with quiet movement. Cars pulling in. Doors shutting. People straightening jackets before heading inside. Meeting day always brought a kind of restless energy. Everyone wanted to look their best, sound their smartest, make the right impression. I stepped out of my car and felt the cold sting my cheeks. I adjusted my scarf and walked toward the main entrance. The glass doors reflected my image faintly. Older woman, steady steps, no fear in her face. Not even a flicker. Inside the lobby was warm and bright. A few board members were gathered near the coffee machine, chatting about schedules and year-end projections. When they saw me, they greeted me with polite smiles, but I noticed something different this time. Something I hadn't seen in a while. Respect. Genuine respect. I wondered if they'd sensed the changes too, the shifting dynamics, the misplaced confidence of those late-night meetings I'd been left out of. "Good to see you here early," one of them said. I smiled. "Important day." Another member handed me a fresh cup of coffee. "You look prepared." I offered a small nod, though prepared felt like an understatement. I wasn't just showing up. I was reclaiming something that should never have been taken from me. As more people arrived, I stood near the hallway leading to the conference room. Conversations swirled around me, about numbers, projections, new proposals. But I listened only for one thing: voices I didn't trust. My son arrived 5 minutes before the meeting. He walked quickly, eyes darting around like he was trying to avoid mine. He gave me a nod, tight, formal, uncomfortable, and hurried toward the conference room with a stack of papers in his hand. Papers he hadn't shown me. Papers she probably helped him prepare. And then she walked in. Confident. Chin lifted. Dressed a little sharper than usual, as if she expected today to be her moment. She greeted people with a bright, polished smile. The smile of someone who believed she belonged here. When her eyes met mine, that smile faltered just slightly before she quickly recovered. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was smooth but her posture tensed, just a fraction. I nodded politely. "Morning." She moved past me, but I didn't miss the quick glance she gave my son, the silent confirmation they exchanged. A small message in a single look. "We're ready." Or maybe, "It's our day." They didn't know I had already spent nights rearranging the deck they planned to play with. When we all entered the conference room, the long table was already set with folders, pens, and small notepads. The projector hummed quietly at the front of the room. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I took my usual seat near the center, one I had held for decades. My son sat 3 chairs down. She sat beside him. As everyone settled, the meeting began with routine updates. Numbers, progress reports, year-end summaries. I listened carefully, taking notes even when I didn't need to. Every word built toward the moment I was waiting for. Just as my son prepared to present the new strategic direction he and she had drafted, I quietly reached into my bag. My fingers brushed against the USB drive, the small, harmless-looking object that carried the truth they assumed I didn't know. I felt its weight, cool and firm, and placed it gently on the table. I waited until the room fell silent and all eyes shifted toward the presentation screen. My son cleared his throat, trying to appear confident. As many of you know, we've been working. I interrupted with a calm, steady voice. Before we begin, I have something to share. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. A few people straightened their backs, sensing a different tone. My son's eyes shot toward me, wide with panic. Mom, this isn't. The woman placed a hand on his arm. Let her speak, she said, though I could hear the tightness in her voice. I stood slowly, carrying the USB drive to the front of the room. My knees ached slightly and I adjusted my stance before plugging it into the laptop. The projector blinked. The screen lit up. Then I pressed play. The first video clip filled the room. Their voices. Their laughter. Her calling me outdated. Him agreeing. A stunned silence fell over the room. Then murmurs. Disbelief. People shifted in their chairs, glancing between the screen and the pair sitting rigidly at the table. My son looked pale, sweat forming along his hairline. The woman stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, but her fingers gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. I let the clip play to the end. Then without a word I played the second. This one showed contract details, her handwriting, not mine. Unauthorized changes. Late-night meetings. Decisions made without board approval. A board member leaned forward. Where did this come from? I answered calmly. From my office. My own camera. The room erupted into whispered discussions, disbelief spreading like wildfire. People exchanged looks. Surprised, confused, angry. My son tried to stand. There's an explanation. Sit, one of the board members said sharply. For the first time since this all began, my son looked small. Not because of the evidence, he already knew what he'd done. But because the room no longer saw him as the confident leader he tried to be. They saw the truth. I watched the woman out of the corner of my eye. She kept her chin up, but her breathing was uneven. Her carefully built composure was cracking around the edges. One board member spoke up. This is serious. These actions violate multiple agreements. Another said, we trusted you both. The woman finally lost her restraint. This is being taken out of context, she snapped. We were trying to improve the company. By excluding the founder? Someone asked. Her mouth opened but no words came out. I stepped back from the screen, placing both hands lightly on the table. I have devoted my life to this business. I have given everything I could to build it. I trusted the people at this table. I trusted my son. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't rise. But it carried a weight that quieted every whisper in the room. The room dissolved into chaos after that. Voices layered over each other, questions thrown toward my son and the woman, accusations, clarifications, disbelief. But the board members acted faster than I expected. Years of working together had taught them one thing. Leadership built on dishonesty collapses quickly. It took less than 20 minutes. The woman was relieved of her position. Immediately. My son lost his title and voting privileges. His access to accounts was suspended. Her credentials were revoked on the spot. And through all of it I stood quietly watching their partnership crumble piece by piece. They had walked into this room expecting to rise together. They left it undone. When the meeting finally ended, the board members left in groups, whispering among themselves, glancing back at me with sympathy, admiration, or quiet support. My son stayed seated at the table, shoulders hunched, staring at the empty folder in front of him. The woman stood behind him, arms crossed tightly, her expression a blend of anger and disbelief. He finally looked up at me. Why did you do this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I held his gaze. I didn't do anything. You did. The woman let out a sharp breath, turning toward the door. He didn't look back. I picked up my bag, walked toward the doorway and paused beside him. You made your choices, I said gently. How I've made mine. I didn't wait for a response. I walked down the hallway, my steps steady, my breath even. And for the first time in a long time I felt the air lighten around me. The hardest part was done. Not finished, but done. I walked down the hallway with the same steady steps I'd taken walking into that room, only now the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. Not gone, just lifted enough that I could breathe more deeply than I had in weeks. The elevator doors slid open lazily, as if giving me time to reconsider what I'd done. But I stepped inside without hesitation, pressed the button for the lobby and exhaled as the doors closed. The sound echoed softly in the small space, weaving into the hum of the machinery. As the elevator descended, my reflection in the stainless steel walls came into view. My hair slightly out of place. My eyes tired but bright. My posture straighter than it had been in years. I didn't look broken. I didn't look vengeful. I looked free. The doors opened into the quiet lobby. A few employees stood in small groups, whispering, their eyes flicking up when they recognized me. Some stepped back respectfully. Others offered timid nods. A few gave me looks of quiet support. I didn't stop to acknowledge any of it. I kept walking. Outside, the cold afternoon air hit my face. A gust of wind carried loose leaves in circles across the pavement, swirling like they couldn't decide where to land. I took a slow breath, letting the chill settle into my lungs. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. "Mom, please." His voice. My son's voice. Small, shaky, desperate. A sound I had imagined hearing for years whenever he apologized for teenage mistakes or awkward misunderstandings. But this wasn't that. This wasn't childhood guilt or impulsive fear. This was the weight of consequences he had helped create. I stopped walking but didn't turn around. He hurried closer until he stood a few feet behind me. His breath came out in short, uneven bursts. "Just talk to me. Please." I turned slowly. He looked nothing like the confident young man who had walked into that meeting earlier. His shoulders slumped. His tie hung slightly crooked. His eyes were rimmed red, though I wasn't sure if it was from anger or embarrassment, or both. "Say what you need to say," I said softly. He glanced back at the building, then at me. "You blindsided me in there." I raised an eyebrow. "Did I?" He swallowed hard. I didn't expect it. Not like that." A bitter smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "You didn't expect consequences, you mean?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said. I lifted a hand gently. "Don't blame her. Not for your part." He blinked, stunned into silence. For the first time in this entire mess, the truth became clear in his expression. He had genuinely believed someone else would carry the blame. That she had orchestrated everything and he had been a bystander swept along. But what he'd forgotten was simple. The camera hadn't shown a man being manipulated. It had shown a man participating. I softened my voice. "You could have stopped her. You could have told me. You could have walked away. You didn't." His shoulders sagged further. "Mom, I made mistakes." "Not mistakes," I corrected quietly. "Choices." He looked down at the concrete as though the cracks in the pavement might offer him answers. I watched him struggle to find words, watched the confusion settle in as he tried to reconcile who he had been with the one he had become. "Can you forgive me?" he whispered. It was the question I knew would eventually come, but hearing it now, after the damage, after the silence, after the lies, didn't sting the way I imagined it would. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. He lifted his gaze, his eyes searching mine. "What can I do? Just tell me." For the first time I let a sliver of warmth soften my features. Not mercy. Not forgiveness. Just truth. "Start over," I said. "Without shortcuts. Without someone pushing you to take what isn't yours." A tear slipped down his cheek. He wiped it quickly, embarrassed. "And stay away from her," I added. His face tightened with something, guilt, maybe fear. We're not together anymore." I studied him carefully. "Why?" "She left as soon as the board made their decision," he said with a hollow laugh. "She walked out before I could even say anything. But there was the price of betrayal. Not mine, his." "That's not the final price," I said quietly. He looked confused. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. Not yet. I simply stepped past him and walked toward my car. I could feel his eyes on my back, heavy with regret. But this time I didn't feel responsible for carrying it. The next few days moved slowly, each hour stretching like a long breath. I didn't rush anything, not my thoughts, not my decisions. I let myself feel the heaviness, the release, the grief, the strange relief. All of it. On the third morning the woman contacted me. A long message. Pages worth, it felt like. She apologized. She justified. She blamed the pressure, the ambition, the expectations put on her. But what struck me most was the final sentence. "I never meant to hurt you personally." The lie made me chuckle softly. Everything she'd done had been personal. I didn't reply. Some apologies don't deserve answers. Instead, I forwarded her message directly to our legal department with a brief note. Document for record. That was the real final price for her. Her name officially tied to the actions she had tried so hard to bury. Her career wouldn't recover from this, not quickly, not easily. My son's price came later. He visited my house one evening just before sunset. The sky glowed a soft orange and the living room filled with warm light as I opened the door. He stood there with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, looking younger than he had in years. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, glancing around like the house might have changed since his last visit. He sat on the couch. I sat across from him. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I got a job offer." I waited. "It's not at the company," he continued. "It's a junior position somewhere else. Small firm. A new beginning. A humble one. One he needed." "That's good," I said. He nodded, staring at his hands. "It pays less. A lot less." "Money isn't the point," I replied softly. He looked up, eyes glassy. "I know. I wanted you to hear it from me." We talked for nearly an hour. About life. About responsibility. About trust. About the years between us that had gone silent without either of us noticing. I didn't forgive everything in that hour. Forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a door you open slowly, sometimes 1 inch at a time. But I saw something I hadn't seen in him in years. Humility. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated by the doorway. "Mom." "Yes. Will you ever trust me again?" I walked over to him and placed a hand gently on his arm. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But I'd like to try." He nodded, swallowed hard, and whispered, "Thank you." Then he left, disappearing down the front steps into the evening air. Later that night I went to the office alone. I unlocked the door with my old key, the one I'd had for decades. The building was quiet. Peaceful. The hum of the heater echoed softly down the hallway. I walked into my office, the one that had once felt invaded, and looked around. My desk was empty now. My files were organized. Her mug was gone. The air felt different. Clean. Mine again. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Lights shimmered across the buildings. Cars moved in small streams below. Somewhere in all that movement, my son was rebuilding. Somewhere in another part of town, she was facing the consequences she had earned. And here I stood, steady again. Not the same woman who walked into that office weeks ago. Not the same mother who trusted everything blindly. Not the same leader who let silence replace boundaries. I had changed. Quietly. Powerfully. I rested my hand on the window frame and spoke softly into the stillness of the room. Betrayal has a price. And today, everyone paid theirs. The words didn't echo. They settled, firmly, finally, into the space around me. I turned off the lights, closed the office door behind me, and walked down the hallway feeling lighter than I had in years. And as I stepped into the cool night air, the final truth washed over me. Revenge hadn't hardened me. It had freed me. I didn't get revenge to destroy them. I got it to rebuild myself. If this story touched you, shocked you, or made you feel something deep, subscribe. I share real, emotional, revenge-driven stories that speak to the strength of women who refuse to stay silent. Your support means the world.